I wanted to start off with an email from Jack, and Jack says this: I have listened to countless talks by Adya and Mukti, but I still seem to struggle with applying the teaching. I get the sense that it is because I can't trust myself, and I'm not putting my full effort into the practice in fear of deluding myself. Do we need to trust ourselves, or do we need to just trust in the consciousness you speak of? You know, Jack, that's a really good question, because I do often say this to people, is to trust yourself. And what I really mean by trust yourself is I'm not really saying in our whole conditioned self, to trust in that, because we've all done that in our life. And it's got us into sometimes a lot of difficult situations because that part of the personality structure, is so conditioned that it's really hard to know what to trust about it or not. So when I say trust yourself, even though this, for some of you, will probably sound pretty abstract, what I really mean is to trust the spirit within you. It's not the ego voice. It's not the personality voice. Neither is it separate from them. But essentially, it's not the ego or the personality voice. But there's something inside that kind of comes from a stillness, and it's not essentially intellectual. It's not essentially thought-driven. Sometimes we can receive guidance by what's been called the still small voice, like a little whisper in stillness that just gives you the most simple guidance. It's never a long explanation about anything. It's just usually very succinct, very brief, and doesn't justify itself, doesn't argue its point. The more ego-driven, voice will often, it'll just produce often a long series of analysis, and it will justify itself. If you ask it, well, is this, how do I know this is the voice to trust? And it will give you all sorts of explanations of why it's trustworthy, or it might be saying it's untrustworthy. But the still small voice, it's just like a gift of guidance that comes from stillness, that comes from the heart. And it doesn't justify itself. It's just like a little gift, and you take it or you leave it. You listen or you don't listen. In my way of seeing all this, I think that the still small voice is actually the original form, or the deepest form of a word that's not used that much today, which is our conscience. Our conscience is often, there's a kind of conscience that's really kind of learned. It's learned through growing up, through being socialized and encultured, and through family and friends, and it's sort of this really conditioned kind of conscience, which isn't real conscience anyway. It's just sort of a conditioned voice that tells you what you should or shouldn't be doing. In psychology, they would call that really the superego, sort of the parental ego. But the still small voice is different from that. It's a different kind of conscience. It's something that comes from a very quiet place, a very still place. It doesn't judge, and it doesn't say should or shouldn't. It's just like a little gift of guidance. And so sometimes it can arise as a still small voice. More often than not, actually, that inner guidance of spirit isn't really conceptual at all. Sometimes it'll arise as sort of a still small voice, but more often than not, it's this sort of inner sense. It's this really kind of the quickest way to access it is actually in your body. Because our bodies are really, really good truth detectors. So when we're not in truth, no matter what our mind thinks, our bodies will tend to have some sort of contraction, some sort of uncomfortability. And often that is the underlying sense of spiritual guidance or true conscience, a conscience that isn't culturally derived, but it's sort of intuitively derived from stillness. And of course, when we start out, often we don't have a really very accurate sense of that at all. We really may not sense it at all because many human beings have been literally conditioned to not listen to that, not even to listen in a subtle way to their own bodies, much less the subtle guidance of sort of the still small voice. Most of us as we grew up, we were encultured to do what we're told, to society and our upbringing, it basically sort of conditioned us with its kind of conscience or its sense of morality, which is fine, it's not necessarily wrong, but sometimes it can actually be misleading, and sometimes it can actually go against the real intuitive or divine guidance. It's a bit like achieving balance. When you learn to walk or you learn to ride a bike, how do you learn balance? How do you learn how to walk? You don't learn how to walk because someone tells you how to walk. If you can imagine a parent saying to their, 1 or 2 year old child, well, when you want to walk, you first you stand up and then you move your foot forward and then you put your heel down and roll onto the ball of your foot and then bring the next leg up. And all of this would be quite meaningless to a child. Basically, you just put them up on their feet and you just say, okay, try to walk. And the child will take a step or 2 steps and then they'll kind of fall down, and then you put them back on their feet and you say, give it another try. Let's try again. And they take a step or 2 and they fall down. And then they start taking 3 steps before they lose balance, and then 4 steps, and then 5 steps. And it's not something you can figure out. You can't figure out how to find balance, or if you're walking on a tightrope, you can't figure out. As soon as you start thinking about it, you're going to fall off the tightrope. You're going to lose balance. So this is part of what it is to come into our deeper sense of what's trustworthy, which is really what we're talking about, what's really trustworthy inside. And part of it is, at least for a while, it's literally kind of trial and error, just like learning to ride a bike or learning to walk or walk on a tightrope. It's trial and error. You try it out, you feel for that sense of what's trustworthy, and then in retrospect you often be able to tell, well, that ended up being really trustworthy, or no, I think I was kind of mistaken. I was a little bit confused or deluded. And it's just, it's like falling down then. But if you don't get, overly judgmental and overly afraid, you just pick yourself up and you say, okay, the next time it's relevant, I'm going to see if I can listen to what to trust. And maybe it'll be on the mark, maybe it will be off the mark. But bit by bit, you come to almost like finding balance. You hone in intuitively with what you can trust inside of yourself. And it's realizing that it's what we're trusting, what we come to realize we can trust is something more intuitive and quiet and non-insistent. Because what's trustworthy doesn't have to be insisted. It doesn't assert itself. It just presents itself. The voice of truth just presents itself. We listen or we don't listen. It doesn't need to argue its point. Not only does it not need to argue its point within you, it doesn't need to argue its point with the people around you. It's a very, very simple thing. So, different people have different backgrounds. They grew up in different ways. They had different influences. And some people were literally taught to mistrust themselves, to have all of the authority placed outside of themselves, all the guidance placed outside of themselves. So a lot of people were taught to not listen to themselves. It's very common in most cultures, but it's certainly common in Western culture that it's fairly rare that we're actually really taught from a young age to sort of find our way with what we can really trust, with what's really truthful inside. Usually all the truth is being imposed from the outside, and that's conditioned judgment and ideas and even ideas of what's right and wrong and all the rest. So don't be afraid just to start to listen in a quiet way, and also just to feel, because it won't always arise as in words. Sometimes it will just be a feeling, an inclination. And when I say feeling, I don't mean an emotional feeling, because we can be deluded that way too. We can have a real sense of rightness or righteousness emotionally and mentally, but really be pretty deluded. It's underneath the normal conceptual mind, and it's underneath the emotional reactivity, positive or negative. It's a deeper intuitive sense and feeling. And you just have to just endeavor to start listening to it, and then see when it seemed accurate, when it didn't. And that helps you hone in more and more on what you can trust. And like anything in life that we're really gonna learn deeply, is we have to be willing to fail. We have to be willing to fail over and over again. Just like when a child learns how to walk or learns how to ride a bike, you have to be willing to fall down. Otherwise, you'd never get up on your feet again. And so it's true trustworthiness, discovering that inside yourself it takes some real listening and trial and error, and it's not easily won, because the conditioned mindset can be so strong that it can often override it. And but you find it kind of by doing it. You find it by practicing it, and it really, really comes in handy. Beyond that, I can't really give a 3-point plan, or here's how you'll know if what's arising within you is trustworthy or not, because the reference at the end of the day can't be something that you apply outside of yourself. It can't be just a set of instructions. It's a deeply intuitive process. And let me say this about the issue of trust too. With the 14 years that I was with my teacher before she asked me to teach, she rarely, if ever, gave me sort of a straight answer to any question I brought her to her. And for a while, that would make me, I didn't like that. That I wanted her to just tell me, this is okay, do it this way or do it that way, or this is, to give me some sort of absolutes. She would give guidance, but she would often say, well, how does it seem to you? And then if I said something that didn't seem on the mark, she'd say, well, maybe you could look at it a little bit more like this, or maybe you could look at it a little bit more from this point of view. And she wasn't telling me this is the way it is, but it was like, maybe you could look like this, maybe. So it was like someone she was like helping me to find that balance of what was trustworthy. And at first it was unsettling, because I think I was not unlike a lot of people where, we want our references for what's trustworthy and truth to be sort of absolute. And we want a teacher to tell us, this is, just this, just do it this way or do it that way, or this is trustworthy or not trustworthy. But if that's the way we approach it, we never really find out what's trustworthy within ourselves. We never really find that out. And so that's a really important part of our own human development, and certainly part of our spiritual development, is really learning to listen in a deep, deep way.